is Diarmuid McCarthy, and I was born in Scart in Castle Treasure, Douglas, in 1946.
My name is Sylvia Gash. I grew up in Douglas, under the Bow Wow. Fantastic place to live, and I was there for a young number of years until I got married.
I was brought up in Castle Treasure in Douglas, on a lane known to older Douglas people as Maggie the Cat's Lane.
Well, my name is Julia Cotter, and I was born and bred in Douglas, and I'm very proud of the fact I was born and bred in Douglas.
My name is Marie Piper. We were Piper's Amusements Fun Fair in the village for donkey's years, well over 100 years.
I was born and reared here in top of Douglas, in a place called Scart.
Well, our connection to Douglas is we were both born in Douglas.
I grew up on the South Douglas Road, and at that time we knew everybody.
I'm Liam Edwards, and I was born in 1945 and I've lived in Douglas Village in the same house virtually until now.
I was born in Frankfield, just beside the church, in 1947 in my grandparents' house. And I grew up there till I was 5 with my parents and grandparents, and then I moved to Donnybrook.
I lived all my life in Douglas, nowhere else. Douglas, Douglas, Douglas.
What Douglas looked like when we were growing up was very different to what Douglas is now.
But being a kind of a country village, it had that great feeling. And everybody knew each other. We knew all our neighbours, and we didn't live in each other's pockets, but we were there to help everybody else, you know.
Oh, it was a country village. It was country that time. It was still in the county, and it was like an ordinary country village.
Like I remember, like by night you could hear the West Cork Railway. From my bedroom I could hear woo in the distance, like the kind of because that train came into town, you know. There was a different station in Cork before.
At that time we knew everybody, you know, the children, we had no television, so we used to be out playing around. We knew everybody on the road by name and everything.
All the little cottages that are there today, every single one of those in the East Village, Tramway Terrace, they were all occupied. Garton Park wasn't even built, and all the back village, they were all those houses were all lived in.
And I mean, there was big families brought up in all those small houses in Douglas Village, both in the front village and the back village, as I call them.
We were happy enough, but I mean, it was cold. The cold is what you would remember, really. No central heating, drafty windows.
And you knew everyone in the village, and everybody knew everyone. You knew Mrs. Barrett, and you knew her family, and you knew all the people up in Columbus Terrace, and all the people that moved into Garton Park.
There was a shop not far from me, sold penny bars and cleave stuffing. In I'd go at 3:30 to slake me thirst with razor. Now the woman of the shop, she said, don't smoke no woodbines in the bed. Take some donkey's guds instead, believe me 'tis me dazzler. In and out, around we go, the wheel of life runs sure but slow. School by soon to almond grow, like the leaves that tumbling down, no.
Before Douglas Shopping Centre came in 1971, there was a lot of small shops. Down the road from us at the entrance to Calderwood, there was a shop, commonly known around as Bella's Shop. Jimmy Crowley actually has a song about it.
I climbed up to the icy hills, the smoke gushed out from Morris Mills. Hoot, 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 the hooter went, and the blue-clad weavers flowed. Up to Bella's shop we did repair, where paraffin hung in the air. I left me heart in the forum there, and not in San Francisco. In and out.
Well, there was up, but was at where the entrance to Calderwood is now. That was Bella's shop. There was Bella Trinder's. There was a kind of a tinny shed, you know, galvanised shed, and it sold paraffin oil and loose porridge and things like that. And if you got the porridge, you know, there'd be a smell of paraffin off it from her hands. She just put the hands into the oatmeal and put it into your bag, and there'd be a smell of paraffin oil off the oatmeal, like, and that, to make the porridge.
The minute you go in the door there, you'd smell it.
A West Cork Protestant who married Chris Hennessy, who had Montpellier, you know, at the time. He's a bit of a rogue and a bit of a rascal, but he's a nice old fella, you know, too. And Bella was kind of rough and ready, you know, but she drove a car which was very, in the 50s, not too many women driving, you know. And she had bottles of lemonade and raspberry, that's all. And nice cakes, like cheesecakes, you know, the small cheesecakes, and Russian logs. And of course the whole mill came out at 1 o'clock when the whistle would blow up to Bella's shop. And the blue overalls. And they'd be smoking mad in those days. And I used to get a fag as well, like an afternoon or whatever. And if you're very lucky, you got a seat in the forum. And Fanny Barry had a forum as well. A little forum is a circular kind of a stool. Took up most of the space actually in the floor. But it was very handy because people just sat down and they could talk to Fanny behind, you know. And so like a pub, like. So it's the nearest thing of being in a pub, you know, or a club.
I remember one time there when you'd put enough money together and you'd buy, you could go in and buy Cadbury's chocolate, the long narrow ones for threepence. But you only ate so far because the mouse or the rat had eaten the rest of it, and you just go. And I mean, you didn't. I know when I told that story before to other people, they kind of nearly got sick. But in those days, it wasn't plentiful, so when you got your chocolate, you didn't mind who had helped themselves to the other side of it. You just kept going.
But Douglas that time then was very small. We'd say, if people can imagine now where the East Village is, when you come out of there and turn right, there was a shop there. We used to call it Dan's. And then across the road you had another shop, and she was called Fanny Barry. There were 2 elderly ladies and they used to sell Chester cake, but the mice used to be in the window nibbling at the Chester cake as well, but whoever bought it just ate it anyway. They weren't worried about the mice.
Across the road where Eco are was Fanny Barry's, and she was quite a character. She had all these
Donkey's wedding cake.
Cakes in the window and flies landing on them, and we used to call
10,000 flies can't be wrong.
Yeah.
I loved Fan Barry's because it was near the school, you see, as well. You could just slip back to Fanny's and get a bit of a halfpenny worth of Cleves toffee, which is not good for your teeth, I'd say. Just like, it looked like chocolate, which was hard toffee, and she'd crack it and give it to you.
In West Village then, of course, we had the famous Chambers shop, and a small little shop where people handed in their list for their groceries, and you had a little book, and she wrote down how much you owed. At the end of the week, if you didn't have enough money, you just paid off what you had. Because those times, you know, they were hard times. And if people didn't work one week, they might get work the next week. And she never, ever, ever worried about that. You just paid off your money whenever you could.
Nobody did a weekly shop that time. So they might be going twice a day for the middle of the day meal and for the tea time, and buying lots of small little things like a quarter pound of sausages because refrigeration wouldn't have been good.
Corned beef, bacon, like they were preserved meats, like they were cured meats. So I mean, you didn't have to have a fridge to keep them. And you know, even if you had them cold, they'd last 2 days anyway without the fridge. There was meat delivered, bread delivered, milk delivered, and veg delivered. In an awful lot of cases, there was people going around selling veg door to door. And most people's houses had very limited accommodation space for anything. I mean, fitted kitchens are a thing from the 60s, 70s onwards.
The milk was delivered by horse and cart twice a day. And my mother would come out with a jug.
They'd come out with their jugs or buckets or whatever they had. There was a cap that they used when they bottle it. You'd come out with your own bottle, or he'd have a few bottles, and some people would have it and stick that on it.
I suppose the big thing is that nothing was pre-packed. You had loose tea, loose sugar, loose butter, loose biscuits, so everything had to be weighed and packaged on the site. People used to use paraffin oil for their fires and maybe for primer stoves. A lot of, I mean, this is back in late 40s. I don't think a lot of people had cookers. We definitely wouldn't have had fridges or washing machines or tumble dryers or anything like that.
And then there was, on the beginning of St. Columba's Terrace, then there was an old-fashioned butcher shop. Arthur was the butcher, and you go in and you'd order your meat from him, and then you'd have to go up to the glass part, and you'd have to pay Miss Sheehan then for your meat, and all the sawdust on the floor. And then down further, sort of where the Douglas Shopping Centre is now, there was Wynn's. They used to sell fish. And that was the village. That was it then, yeah.
My grandfather and grandmother, they had a shop at the Finger Post, and my grandfather was a blacksmith. His sisters, two of his sisters, Nell and Maggie, and a brother, Pad, ran the pub. That's O'Driscoll's Bar, which is still there. I suppose the biggest difference really is that we had no supermarkets, no shopping centres. So every second house was nearly a shop. So you had a shop at the Finger Post, you passed St. Columba's Hall, you had Mrs. Sheehan's shop on the left-hand side, and down further, Mara Dan had a shop, which is now demolished. And next to that, the O'Mahonys lived in a 3-storey house, which is still there. That's Marcello's, the Italian restaurant. And Mrs. O'Mahony ran a shop there. In front of the Legion Hall, you had petrol pumps, and that's where O'Mahony's had their business there. Down further, you had a Miss Sheehan at the other end of the village. And just before her shop, Nancy McCarthy had a small little chemist shop that she opened, I'd say, about 1950. And Nancy was also a very, very colourful character. If you go across the road, then you had the dispensary, as it was known, and the district nurse was based there. Barry's was across the road, and that was just another corner pub at the time, run by Mrs. Barry and her son Michael.
And when Casey's chip shop opened, oh my God, that was a huge novelty. I was 11 when that opened, so that's that many years ago.
John Click, we used to call him. He was the shoemaker. He was just up beyond Columba's Terrace there. He was a great man, and he used to sell all second-hand comics and second-hand books. And you could go into him and he'd tell you loads of stories while he'd be mending the shoes, and he'd let you look at the books and read them, and he was such a nice man as well now. John Click was his name. John O'Leary was his right name, but they used to call him John Click because he was fixing the shoes. So that was his other name.
Born at the top of the Highty Hills, the only place you could see boat mills. Raised in Moses Woods, where she knew every tree. She grew herself a bird when she was only 3. Fanny Barry, Queen of the Racketeers. One day, a teddy boy came into the shop. He ate all the cakes, he just couldn't stop. Just when he was leaving, Fan came on the scene. She went across the road and she called for Gard Green. Fanny Barry, Queen of the Racketeers.
Well, I went to school in Douglas. I started in 1962 on the Carrigaline Road. And at the time, there was 5 teachers there. 4 rooms And the fifth teacher went to the St. Columbus Hall, to the snooker room, teaching there.
Walking to school on the Carrickline Road in Douglas, to the Douglas Boys National School, and bringing out big cans of cocoa for our lunch break. There was no heating in the school, no lighting, so we had to bring big cans of cocoa to heat on the open fire for our lunch.
Miss Mara, she was another O'Driscoll, a first cousin of my mother's, was doing the babies and high infants. And Harrington was doing the first and second class. And Matty and Con Foley were doing between them third and fourth. And Joe Donovan, who was married to Miss Mara's sister, and he, another first cousin of my mother's, was principal teacher at the time.
I went to school in Douglas, National School. I was 5 before I went to school, but I was born in 5th of February 1938, and I can remember back my first day at school. Coming into Douglas Village then would have been our way to school. So starting school, we'd pick up friends on the way, especially from Douglas Villas and the Burkes. I remember the Burke sisters.
Everyone walked to school. They walked from Donnybrook, Grange, Roadstone, wherever.
Maryborough.
We weren't particularly, didn't have a particularly long walk compared to others.
The Bow Wow was the bridge, which is still there today. I can't believe it now. They have repaired it and I'm sure strengthened it. But that Bow Wow could tell many stories, many stories. We used to love going in there because you'd hear your own echo. And we used to shout Bow Wow, and you'd hear Bow Wow coming back to you.
It was raining, you were wet all day. There was nowhere to put your clothes to dry out like that when you came to school. You soaked that water into you even when you walked down to school, and we had the wet clothes coming home as well. Our coats were wet when coming home as well at 3:30 in the day. We started at 9.
Really cross teachers, and there was another teacher there. She wasn't too bad. She was nice enough.
Very strict.
Oh, she was.
And she'd use...
the leg of a chair.
Yeah.
To belt you.
Yeah. She would.
She used to hit me like that. I didn't know anything, but we used to be killed. She'd call you a dunce, get over by the wall. Yeah, she would. Oh, my knuckles used to be sore from her. Yeah.
It was very strict, and the teachers were, the head teacher there at the time was Miss Crotty. She never married or anything, but she lived on the Carrickline Road there. She would say to me, if I didn't have the money for my school books down in time, which my father was very bad with, she would say to me, go over and put on the kettle, put on the cup and saucer for my cup of tea, and do the few bits, you know, just before she'd come over, because she'd have to walk over and she was older, and then she'd give me my books. She was very cross, but very kind. And when my father took me out of the mill out of the school to go to work, she never spoke to him or never took a block ever after that.
Oh, the principal was very strict, all right. You know, a fellow by the name of Joe Donovan, fairly strict.
And he had a name called Joe the Bull, and he took no messing from anybody. If he couldn't beat it into you, he beat it out of you.
Well, Joe Donovan, of course, Joe was notorious, like, you know, everyone dreaded going to him, like, he was very tough. He took the fun really out of, for lads who came from Mr. Foley's class, which was very good. Great, you know, emphasis on Irish and reading and singing. To come into Joe was brilliant at maths, like, to give him that, he was really brilliant. Because the standard he taught of algebra and geometry, a few of us that did go, was maybe, I was one of the lucky ones anyway to go to high school, and the teachers couldn't believe that you do algebra and geometry, that's standards, you know.
We went to the new school then in Douglas West in 1965, and it was like going to a palace. It was absolutely outstanding.
The school I went to was St. Luke's School in Douglas. It was a one-room school at that stage. And we used to have wooden floors, and we'd have a gas fire, and we used to bring in our lunch. But our lunch consisted of an old bottle of Iril coffee, which would be emptied. You'd put cocoa into it, and you'd put it in front of the fire to heat. So you'd have the hot drink when it came to break time. And we'd have 2 teachers in the one room. And of course, not only alone was that a school, for the Church of Ireland, it was also a community centre. And if we had a garden fete, all the desks would be moved back and we'd have the fete there. Or if we had table tennis, which we used to play once or twice a week, desks went back and re-put out again. So it was really a hub for the community, for the Church of Ireland community.
I didn't like school. I liked one teacher I liked all right. He was Con Foley. He was a historian as well. But the rest of them were not nice.
Cold, misery, short pants. Everybody wore a short pants. Nobody wore a long pants. It was a traumatic time when you had to wear your long pants for the first time because everybody remarked on it. No boxer shorts that time. No boys' underwear that I had, and I'd say most people didn't. And a lot of kind of uncomfortable little illnesses at the time that wouldn't be nowadays, probably due to our diet. This was just after the war, and the food would have been plain and simple, and we didn't even have everyday stuff like tomatoes and bananas. They were exotic. They weren't going at the time. So as a result, you got a rash on the inside of your legs. We call it ire, and it was a very, very uncomfortable thing. And you could have that for weeks on end. People got boils. You could get boils on your hand or on the back of your neck. A lump with a little yellow in the centre of it. Very, very uncomfortable. Lots of measles and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, school was different then. You know, lunches, like now when I heard them saying, oh, you can't take this for your lunch and that for your lunch. We often went to school and we had a packet of Marietta for our lunch, and everyone in school had a biscuit out of it. You know, that kind of way now.
God, we used to run out the door, run out like lightning.
Well, the main thing was to get home, but like we just walked through the Mangala on our way home from school, and the only games we played like were, well, we used to play cowboys and Indians, blind man's buff, and you know, climbing trees and swinging up. We were Tarzans and like that in the jungle, coming up through the Mangala.
The woods, where I played after school every day. My mother would be looking for me. I should have been a boy, climbing the trees and catching small trout in the river. We used to put your hands under stones, and I think they used to call it tickling trout, and we used to catch the trout, and that was great fun.
Played a bit of glassy alleys, of course, and chessies. You'd get the chestnut from the trees. You could season it, which would put it up the chimney for overnight or something like that to make it hard. Then bore a hole in it. We were very lucky because my grandfather had the forge, and he had the blacksmith's nails, which were really, really sharp and very good to make the hole in the centre of the chessie. And then you hung that from a bit of string or a bit of thread or whatever you could get, and knocked one against the other. And if you broke another one, you were conquer one. If you broke two, you were conquer two.
We'd play, and we'd have, you know, the stones, the gobbers. Put the stones in your hand, and about 5, you throw them up there, and they drop there.
You got them certain size, certain shape, and you played the gobs. And now the Burkes were champions at gobs.
If you caught the 5 stones on the back of your hand, that was great.
Well, we were demons. I'm afraid I learned to smoke out there. And in the old courtyard of Maryborough House. Of course, they had cattle. That was Dermot Sherrod would have had cattle. So we went through the cattle fields to get to the house. And we played in the hay rigs up there. And I'm talking about now when I was about 5, I'd say 5 up to 7. And we used to, the boys, the Sherrod boys, used to steal the cigarettes, probably Woodbine cigarettes or something in those days, and from their mum. We called her Baba Sherrod. So we had a little tiny butt, and they stole matches and everything, and we go like this with the thing, and coughing and spluttering and choking.
We were smoking very, very young, very young. And when we didn't have cigarettes or butts, we used to go up to Moz's wood, and there were kind of creepers growing along, and they'd be dry, and you could pick off a little bit, and a thin one was a cigarette, and a little heavier one was a cigar. And we lit those, and there'd be every kind of a little maggot walking around inside it, you know. But yeah, I smoked for a long time afterwards. Thankfully, my All Martin sorted me, and I haven't smoked now for nearly 20 years. So.
We used to play 2 balls up against the wall.
Ollie Bolly, who's the wall? Is she big or is she small? Is she fat or is she thin? Ollie, who won the ball?
My father supplied us with a huge rope, so it was skipping, because I lived in Connolly Place and there was 20 houses, so all the children were pretty much the one age, and we'd have that rope like was 3/4 of the road, so 2 people held it, and then you jump in, but you had to be very accurate with your jumping in and jumping out, and they had numerous songs that they used to sing to the skipping.
You go in and I go out, or whatever it was. And we'd make up our own games sometimes, yeah.
And I mean, we didn't have phones, we didn't have computers, we didn't have gadgets, so we had to make our own games.
Oh yes, we relied on ourselves to entertain ourselves, you know.
You'd be out all day, nobody would have to look for you, you know, there was never any danger, like.
And that's the thing too, we were mad for hunting rabbits in the woods with people like Andy Sullivan, and he was kind of a whipper, he was the chief whipper in, like, mad for just dogs, like. That was more of a boyish thing now, like, the girls wouldn't be going on that. But the girls would be playing massive, beautiful games, like, and the songs still ring in my head, like, down in the alley, oh, you know, and it'll be there forever.
The big thing that used to happen in Douglas was the merries, pipers, which is now where the East Village is. And pipers used to open on the Sunday before Patrick's Day.
Just to make sure all the machines were working right. But Patrick's Day was the main day. My God, people would come from everywhere, and especially when the parade in town would finish, they would swarm out to Douglas and have fun. Generations of people, grandmothers, mothers, grandchildren, they all came. It was fantastic.
They had chairplanes and boats and bumpers and stalls where you could pitch a ball or something and win something.
Where people that time, you could win 3 cups, 3 saucers, 3 plates. Those years, long ago, they were a big prize to win, or a frying pan, holy pictures, things like that. People were thrilled when they won something to take it home.
It was a novelty, like, I mean, it was a great event that you'd be looking forward to.
We had a big horse machine. All our horses were timber. Nowadays it's fiberglass horses, so our horses were very special. Hand painted by my father and some of his brothers every year. Then we had the chairplanes. They were swings that would go way out. We had the bumper cars.
The bumpers, we used to be knocking each other, banging each other off with the bumpers, really banging, like, we used to love the excitement of it alone.
But there were magical times in actual fact, like that. you know, the Marys. And people even talk about, say, going down to Crosshaven during the summer, when there was very few people going to anywhere. I mean, Crosshaven and Folkestone, there was people had little summer homes. They were only 4 boxes, but they were fantastic. They were, it was you got out of the way and you know, you got down to the fresh air, and that was it.
Columbus Hall was another great social, and it had no bar at that time. Joe Martin was in charge. Joe was a lovely man, and he kept law and order with the teenagers. You couldn't join the hall until you were 14, and once you got in, you were a man then. We had Radio Luxembourg. That was our treat at the time. Play cards, play snooker. After a while, John O'Leary brought organised table tennis, which was going at the time. We were all fairly handy at the snooker, but you wouldn't be allowed to play snooker until you had 6 months playing billiards.
The place was Pat Coveney.
Pat Coveney, that's right.
She was from Hallbolan. She used to put on plays once a year in St. Columbus Hall.
Which is now the Rugby Club Hall.
They call it the Tinny Shed.
We used to go dancing down there all the time. And I think I was dancing there the night John F. Kennedy died. Yeah, that's when we heard the news. It was so sad.
But in those days, dances were called hops. And of course, all the lads used to stand at one side of the room, the girls at the other, and we'd have some sort of music, and then there'd be a rush from one side to the other. But I had very, very happy memories of there.
The youth club was in the ICA hall, and there was a man called Mr. Lucy, a big tall man, with a lovely, lovely red-headed daughter. And we started getting interested in girls then too, you see. All that was changing. And there was nice girls in Douglas.
I grew up in the 60s, so I had a fantastic dancing life, because from the mid-60s, when I was able to go to Crosshaven, to the Majorca and to the Arcadia and all those places, like the social life we had, like there's none of the kids have it now, you know. And almost every woman and man that time met their partner in a dance hall because that's where we went, except myself on a bus. And I have to say, when I met John, it was love at first sight, because he came down that bus and whatever happened, that was it. That was the 3rd of June. He asked me to get engaged by the start of September. I was going to be 21 in the February, so I got engaged when I was 21. I got married when I was 22, just not too long before he got sick. We just went down and stood there when I said, all I want to do is not renew the vows or anything, just go down to the church, stand where we stood when I got married, and take a few photographs. And we were together for 53 years.
When the Hoosier went at lunch hour, you'd see everybody scurrying down the road in front of our house, from my memory, wearing blue coats. And of course, everybody had a proper dinner at 1 o'clock at that time. It was not a lunch, it was a dinner. So they'd be scurrying down for their dinner. And at 6 o'clock, the Hoosier would go again, and everybody would scurry back again, you know. So a lot of people were employed with the mills.
Well, they were big employers. They were St. Patrick's in Douglas Village and Morrow's in Donnybrook. Well, I think John Morrow took it over about 1890 to give the workers, to give people work, you know. And but before that, the Pollocks built the 40 houses, mill houses, shall we say, 17 on the lower deck and 23 on the top. And they were all for people that worked in the mills. But when John Morrow took it over about 1890, he brought people down from the north of Ireland to teach the people here how to work the mills. And they were known as the Ballygallies. Ballygally is a village in County Tyrone. And they were brought down from, a lot of them were Scottish. And they came to the north of Ireland from Scotland, and eventually came from the north of Ireland down here to teach the people how to work the mills. Some of the families then they settled here and had their families here, and some of their descendants are still here, you know, in Douglas and Donnybrook area. there's a terrace of houses in Donnybrook called Donnybrook Terrace, 7 houses, and they're affectionately known as Scotchy's Terrace, because it was Scotch people that lived there. And then up the Grange Road, there's Grange Terrace, there's 11 houses, I think, there, and they were where the management in the mill lived. And John Morrow himself then lived in Grange, in Mount Grange House, which is long gone even before my time, but the lodge is still there going in the gates. And his brother Paddy, 'twas Morrow Brothers, Paddy lived in Ballybrack on the way up from Douglas Village up to Grange Cross on the left-hand side.
But the jobs in the mill that time, I went into what was called the darning shed, which was invisible mending. And I have to say I hated it because it was very intricate work, you know. I found it very boring but I was there until I got married at 22. But the wages, I mean, the first wages that I would have had at maybe 15 when I was trained in was like that time was £11, 1 and 6, which was the hell of a lot of money. I mean, my mother thought she was after winning the lottery and I had to hand up everything. So happy memories and not so happy memories, you know.
It was great. It was great. I just loved it, and I cried and cried for weeks to go. My mother didn't want me to go.
The crack that the tuners would be up to, playing tricks on them, you know, with looms, doing kind of sabotaging the looms and just playing pranks like.
A bucket of steam over to the tucking houses, they used to call it, and the man that was in there, Mr. Hunter, he lived next door to my grandfather, so he was a much older man, and he knew me since I was a small baby, since I was born up there. And I was sent over to him just a couple of weeks after I started for a bucket of steam, because that's the steam room and the tucking and that. What it was, I mean, in all fairness, if I thought about it. And then another time I was sent up to another section for the skirting ladder.
Where we all worked when we were young, when we were even going to national school, we worked with farmers, tinning turnips and putting cabbage plants and piking hay and things like that. We always worked with farmers when we were young.
This is the map of our farm that was drawn when we became the legal owners of it in 1887. We think, we can't make out the writing down there. But all those ditches and the whole lot are exactly as I remember them up to the 1970s. And as soon as we joined the EU, things started to change. You were doing a bit of everything, is in that the farm that in those days was a bit of everything. You had sheep, cows, beef cattle, tillage, potatoes, everything. And a lot of your friends from school would come up and help, we say, at a thing called tinning, and which I suppose nowadays no one would know what that is. There, in my own son's case, to be more down to Queensworth or Tesco rather than helping coming up to the farm, like, to be too dirty of a job nowadays.
I mean, there were some great characters in Douglas. Remember, there was very little dole, so people would sort of live on their wits. And I suppose the best ones that are always told, you see, are told about somebody who was a bit work shy. You know, and like one famous character, I won't name, because I mean, but some local farmer asked him one day, he said to him, I have a lot of beet to tin. That time sugar beet was, they'd have to tin them out because there'd be 4 seeds growing in one. You would take out 3, but you'd have to do it in your hands and knees. And he asked him the question, he said to him, well, how much a day are you paying? And of course the farmer gave him such a price, he says, well, he says, they can keep growing that way.
A lot more relaxed back in the day than it is now. Make one mistake and it costs. You know, so massive changes in farming within the farm gate, not mind outside the farm gate, like.
So we always had parish leagues in Douglas, like in the village. Like we had, we say, South Douglas Road, and we had West Douglas and East Douglas, and there were parish leagues in hurling and football. That was a great occasion because we all thought we were playing in All-Ireland finals.
There was a lot of sports facilities There was a lot of things, the GA, you know, and there was soccer and rugby, and there's a lot, even still now, there's a lot of things going on. A lot of different sports clubs.
We'd all play, like, regardless of our ability, if you like, from the road, you know. We were Scott and Donnybrook, and that was our team. We could be playing in the back Douglas Road, or we could be playing Grange.
That time it was mostly the lads, you know, the GA or the soccer. You wouldn't really have heard the girls in the sports that time, to be honest. I don't even think there was a girls' sports team around that time. So it would mostly be just the Douglas GA, really. And people used to play a lot of pitch and putt up the Cargline Road.
Oh yeah, pitch and putt started around the hall. That was, every Sunday morning was fantastic. 9 small holes of pitch and putt. Tyg Higgins and Billy Kelleher, Tim Kelleher, Bill Ahern, my own father, my uncles. And then they moved to the pitch and putt on the Carrigline Road sometime in the mid-50s.
The bowling was fantastic. Brought the lads together on Sunday and Saturday, and it's about the only sport that I partake. It's terrible, like, but it was about the only thing I'd played a bit, like, you know. But up the road, up Castle Treasure and Scart, fantastic, like Victor Penfield and Tom Sullivan, Dick Martin, great bowlers, like.
Drag hunting was very popular in Douglas as well at the time. I wouldn't have been that the Carrolls were big into it, and the O'Callaghan's. That would happen up the country here, that somebody would pull a piece of meat for a couple of miles. I wouldn't be an expert on this now, but somebody would run the drag in the morning, and the hounds would be left off, and they would follow the scent of the meat.
All the big houses around Douglas, you know, one of them was Sherrod's, where they had the orchard down the Rochestown Road, and then you had the villas, where a lot of elderly people lived.
So my mum's story really is very interesting, because that goes back to the very early 1900s. She was born in 1905. This was Dunmahon, the famous Dunmahon, which is now level to the ground. And then they moved to Dunlocka on the Rochestown Road, where I was born. We felt we were in the country, growing up in Dunlocka on the Rochestown Road. It would have been opposite the big old house Windsor, which is now the Rochestown Park Hotel. And I remember going over to play there in the big grounds. Next door was the Whittakers, chickens, etc. People would remember that. They would have been Teddy and Nancy Whittaker, lovely, lovely people. We loved them. And after them were the Goldbergs, G.Y. Goldberg, Jewish community. We were very ecumenical in all that row. Next to them was Windy Ridge, which was the Thompsons' house. That was Thompson's Bakery. So you can see the kind of, coming along, what they called, later on, they called a millionaire's row. And my poor mum, after Dad's death, just used to roll her eyes to heaven. She said, if only they knew, far from millionaire, kind of. But she was very, very careful, very frugal. She was brilliant at bringing us up, 5 of us, on nothing, really, except what was left of she couldn't sell the house. My dad died intestate, so she couldn't sell the house until my older brother, or 2 of the children, would have had to be 21, I think, something like that. And it was very hard for her to keep going, but she had paying guests. So from time to time she'd have a few, because it was a big house built, the second one there. So she grew potatoes, carrots. Oh, I remember cabbage, spinach, sprouts, I remember. And she would put them in her saddlebag on her bicycle, and she'd cycle into the Grand Parade, and she sold all her veggies there.
There was a large number of Church of Ireland at that time in Douglas, but it would have been primarily Roman Catholic.
I was nearly reared by, I must say a word for my Protestant neighbours. They were just fantastic.
Ravensdale was unique.
My ma was from Ravensdale, which is a very lovely, picturesque part of Douglas, near the church. There's a little wood there, and I spent the first year of my life there. So she was old Douglas, like. But what I do remember is like living there half the time and coming back to Auntie Nora's house. And a lot of people in Douglas would know her. And Paddy Collins. Paddy was the caretaker in St. Columba's Hall for many years. So he'd be a well-known fella. He used to sing a couple of songs too. I called him my uncle, but he was just my uncle by marriage. One of the Collinses, you know, in Ravensdale.
And up in Ravensdale there was two houses that were originally one house, and they belonged to Mrs. and Miss Reeves, who lived on the Douglas Road, and it was known as the home for the Protestant incurables. And it was actually elderly ladies used to stay there. And then, of course, they were split into two houses. There was the Tuigs on one side and the McGiffrins on the other side. And they were just so unique.
I used to love going over to their house. God, there was a different smell, a different atmosphere.
It was a lovely, lovely house to go into. I have great memories. You'd smell the mothballs going in the door. And she'd always have beautiful, natural arrangement on the whole table. On a Sunday evening, she would make the scones, but never cut by a cutter. They would always be cut by a knife, because you spoilt the scone if you cut it by a cutter. It had to be made into a triangle. So I have very, very happy memories even of that area. We didn't go into the Roman Catholic Church, but definitely the Roman Catholic churches, my friends wouldn't be allowed into our church. They would have felt they were going to hell if they entered a Protestant church.
And I was in altar boy, of course, and that brought me deeper and deeper into parish affairs and going to funerals and getting off from school, going up to the teacher and say, we've a gig, sir. There's a funeral, that's off with you. Like, so it was great to get away from school, probably get a half day, you know. And the stations in the house where they said mass. And
where the priests would go to the houses and he'd say mass and have a meal with all the people in the area, and the idea was to collect the dues. So that was still going on in my time.
I remember too, the hearses. The hearse, when there be a Roman Catholic funeral, the dog would be brought in respect to our neighbours, and he'd be put inside the house, and all our curtains would be drawn, and we wouldn't be allowed out until the hearse passed, just a mark of respect. So there was a great community spirit, you know.
St. Columba's, yeah, so I made my first communion, confirmation, and I got married in the church in Douglas. And I used to be great friends as well then with Paddy Riley from the graveyard. A lot of people would remember Paddy Riley. He was the grave digger, but he lived in the graveyard. He had a little hut in there.
And we were terrified of him. We used to come out of maybe choir practice from the church on a Saturday night, and of course it was very dark and there was bats flying over your head, and you'd be chatting, and the next thing a sod would come over the wall, and it would be Paddy throwing over a wall to say, stop talking and mind your own business and get on with your life, you know.
And I used to do his shopping for him. I used to go down to the shops and get him bread, and he used to love jelly and stuff, and used to give me a shilling then when I come back. And he used to tell me lots of stories in the graveyard, you know, where fathers that time used to come to the gate, and they would have just orange boxes and their babies wrapped in a blanket, and he would take them and he would bury them. The fathers would come out from St. Finbarr's or wherever while the mothers were still in, and because the baby had passed, it's just the father would bring it to the gate in an orange box and give it to Paddy, and a lot of them are buried just inside. No markings, but they're buried just inside the gate. That's how it was done then. I do remember long ago the horse and carts, passing through Douglas, bringing the people that had passed on up to Cart's Hill, up to Cart's Hole, they used to call it then. You know, where the people are all buried up there with the cross. Yeah, I do remember being out in the Carrigaline Road in the school, and you would see a man passing up just with and that's who he was, yeah, taking them to their place of rest, the pauper's graveyard, they used to call it.
And what I think is extraordinary, right up until the 1950s, there were paupers being buried up there, being brought out of the back of the now St. Finbarr's Hospital, and they were put on horses and carts and driven up by a gentleman with picks and shovels in the back of the car without a coffin, and they were buried up there. And often the teacher would say, we'll stop playing now, boys, for a moment and say a prayer for the poor person going up to Carr's Hill. So it remains in its place. Bishop Lucy then renamed it, well, he just named it anyway, I don't think there was any name prior to that, as All Saints Graveyard. And it's that way right down to the present day. And then Bill Sorensen, who was a citizen of the city, 1959 exactly, he erected a cross, which is still there today. And about 5 years ago, it was lit by electricity. So that comes on every night. And it's lovely to see sometimes, but it does act as a reminder of the terrible period of the famine in Cork, and also of that awful situation up there where people were just being thrown into pits, open pits, and you know, if you walk around the graveyard today up there, you'll notice that they're full of humps and hollows. It's not even ground up there at all. There is no gravestone in any part of that graveyard identifying anyone that's buried there.
We're here beside Rochester College, and it's a very significant place here. The cemetery here is a mine of history. The people are buried there. But probably the best known graves are those of two Capuchins, Father Dominic O'Connor and Father Albert Bibby. The college here opened in 1884, the same year that the GAA was founded. Both of them were involved as chaplains to the Irish forces during the War of Independence, which meant that he was chaplain to Moss McCurtain, who was shot in bed in front of his wife and children on his birthday of all days. He was chaplain to him, so he would have celebrated the funeral mass. And then following him, he was chaplain to Terence McSweeney. And then came the treaty, but unfortunately we had a civil war because some accepted the treaty and others didn't. And we had the very, very sad thing then of a civil war. Now the bishops of the country wanted peace, and they sided with those who had accepted the treaty. Father Dominic and Albert ministered to both sides, contrary to the bishop's advice. And then when the treaty came, the bishops cautiously suggested to our superiors it might be better if these men went out of the country for a while. And we had a new mission founded in California, and our superiors decided to send them out to California. Both of them died relatively young out there. Now the Irish in America or in the United States were very anxious that they would be buried in Ireland, but it wasn't what we'd call politically correct. It was a very sensitive area after the Civil War. So they were buried actually in metal coffins, large metal coffins, with a view to bringing them back someday. And eventually it was decided they would be brought back in 1958. And believe it or not, I was there. I was doing the Leaving Cert exam, and I was there. Their bodies were repatriated. They arrived into Shannon Airport on the 13th of June, 1958. Their bodies were brought into Holy Trinity Church in Cork. The following day, 14th of June, 1958, they were brought out here and repatriated here. And as I said, I was standing there that day. My strongest memory is the moment of silence and the hill across from here. There's a hill up there in that area, and somebody played the trumpet. And I even get emotional still. The poignancy of it, just the silence and the playing of the trumpet, and everybody in stony silence.
We're here now at Fort William in Douglas, where on the Ballinreesig Road. There's a grave here where a soldier was buried from the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. Apparently, they were coming back from Kinsale with on a horse and car, and the soldier happened to die, and they just buried him here then, on the side of the road. Well, cattle that time were out in the field summer and winter, and they'd always walk on the dyke coming in to be milked. But at where the soldier's grave was, they never actually walked there. So the grass was green on that grave, winter and summer, where the rest of the ground was reddened from the cattle. There's a lot of history attached to the area, especially about the soldier's grave here where we are, and about Billy the Black and other items as well.
There was a buccaneer or pirate, a respectable trade back in the 18th century, I suppose, from Castle Treasure, and he was working the Caribbean, sacking ships, Spanish ships, you know. I mean, Johnny Depp wasn't in it, like. He was as good as him. And one day he was just going to scuttle a ship by means of putting out the bunghole, and she'd go to the bottom. People, everything, took what gold. They were all laughing, we had to wait for him. And suddenly he heard crying, little child's whimper of a young person. He ran down. He knew the ship was going down, and there was a black lad below, a denizen of the Caribbean, you know, a local. And he said, I can't leave you there. I can't leave you. What's wrong with you, boy? He said. He said, you come back to me, come back to Castle Treasure, and you can play with my nieces, and they'll be mad about you. And you can keep them company and do a bit of people jobs for me around the place. So he took the black boy back to Atkinville, which was the name of his estate or his house, which is roughly by the Border Works. As all Douglas people know where the Border Works is. The Board of Works. It was a kind of a scheme of little roads that were built during the famine to give a bit of relief to the people. And still there is a grand road, but it's now called Summerlee. And poor old Billy saw his new life, met the Douglas people, and started working and whatever. It must have been really strange. Didn't know the language, so on. And he started to work as a butler, and he grew up. And evidently people in Douglas were very fond of him, and he used to go to a local, whatever pub was there in the village at the time, I suppose. They all have a look of being old pubs, like Tackhambarry's and maybe John Sullivan's. I said they were all taverns in their day. And everything went fine until the poor man, when he died, the vicar in Douglas wouldn't allow him be buried in the graveyard. He said, no, you can't have that, he said, you know. So is he Christian or all? Is he name? Or is he black? And so, totally racist thing, like. And very sad, unfortunately, glad that these things have changed. But he was buried in the orchard.
Yeah, so we're here now at Summerlee Castle Treasure in Douglas, at the spot of Billy, where he's allegedly buried. There was a stone wall running across here, part of the fortification of Summerlee, which was originally a castle back in the day. And they knocked the wall in here to make a passageway. That's where the stones went. And there was stones around here representing the grave, which is probably where Billy was. And it's great that he's remembered, and it's fantastic that Jimmy has done a great song about the whole events of the time.
castle treasure. My flocks in our fold, and my falcon is home, and the wild berries blow in the heather.
I call it my home, far away o'er the foam. Call it my home, castle treasure, where Billy's bones lie, 'neath the orchard nearby, as he watched his white sisters at play.
I suppose the first thing that changed about it really was the shops.
Douglas Shopping Centre opened on the 17th of November 1971. And a lot of people would have, like Quinsworth was the main tenant there. And there was a lot of other small shops as well. Shops that we never thought that we would see in Douglas, like shoe shops, paint shops, cake shops, you know, little restaurants, you know, that sort of thing.
Douglas Court was built then.
It changed with the building of the Blue Tower, what we called. And that came in, that was where Dunn stores are now. And people objected madly to that. They actually boycotted Dunn's because of the Blue Tower. And eventually, as you know, there is no Blue Tower today. That was destroyed.
And people thought that there was too many shops there. And then the small shops that they thought would all close, they all flourished because people were still running out of a bottle of milk, still running out of a loaf of bread, and they were still going to them shops to buy stuff. Now, eventually, most of them are closed now. I think all of them are closed, actually.
When we were going to school, the building started, house building started on the Douglas Road.
I can remember actually when the first house was built in Shamrock Lawn, 1964. It wasn't the first housing estate. I think Marlborough Estate, where we're here now today, was about the first. And then they continued after that. You had Grange Heights, you had Calderwood, you had all down the Passage Road. There's quite a lot of housing estates down there. And then you had Donnybrook, got very built up. You had, there's a lot of houses on Montpelier, on that land. And up in Scart, there's quite a lot of houses as well. And even where I'm living myself, there's quite a lot of new people after moving in.
Like where I am now, obviously we haven't moved since. There was at least 5 farms between me and the village. We say take me between my place and the church, we'll say, because taking those as 2 standard pines. I'm the only one left.
You also have a fierce influx of people into the area. I mean, if you ask me tomorrow morning to name the 24 people who live in Columbus Terrace, I would safely say, of the families that I remember there, I would safely say there's only 4 out of the 24 left.
There's not the same sense of community there.
I don't think in Douglas at the moment, apart from sports, I don't see a lot of activities for maybe the 17, 18, you know, that age group, because I have 2 grandchildren that age. And they're a bit young to go into town, and then they're not over the 18, so they won't be allowed into things in town. So there's nothing really in Douglas that they can actually go to. Where we had, like, the dancing was on in Columbus Hall, like, and the dancing was on in probably the JA Hall in Douglas as well. We had more then, you know.
The traffic is a major problem here. Last week now you couldn't move in the village. Last Friday and Saturday, like, people were just stuck. Like long ago, you wouldn't see that at all.
Douglas has become like a city. It's totally, utterly different.
There's not much interaction among people. You know, everybody's on a phone in a bus, there's a phone in there. So like the conversation is practically gone with a lot of people. I blame the mobile phone for it.
Well, I just think, yeah, a lot of people long ago, they had time to stop and talk. You know, like if my mother went to the shop, she could be ages, because she'd meet somebody either from Garton Park or Columbus Terrace, and they'd be talking down the village for ages. Now people were all in a hurry.
Today we have people come into the shop to us and they'd hardly acknowledge that you said hello to them. And everyone's on their phone, and you come along, they could put meat up on the counter to you, pre-packed, and you just say, would you like anything else? And they just show you the card. I just said, then I'm saying I'm finished. Whereas that time, everybody had great chats. You always had someone who could tell a great yarn. And people would nearly time themselves coming to the shop to coincide with that delivery.
They should have preserved the village. It was unique, and like a lot of villages where you go to in Wales or other places, they have preserved villages, and it would have been an absolute focal point if they had done that.
It's hard to say, like it's good and it's not good. With time, like we're always thinking back. I think we shouldn't. We should think forward. But at least, like, we still have the community park and we still have the Mangala and places like that. And they're still there, and I hope they'll still be there, like, during my lifetime anyway.
Well, I suppose naturally you always have a grove for the place where you grew up. And I think there are fantastic people in Douglas, have done fantastic things. When I see people out every Saturday morning from the tidy towns cleaning it up, I think they do tremendous work.
Douglas Tidy Towns was formed in the year 2000, so yeah, it will be 25 years in existence next year. It was originally started as a small organisation, primarily with focus on keeping Douglas tidy. Over the years it has evolved to incorporate areas such as community, heritage, biodiversity and the general well-being of the environment.
It's brilliant to see the kids coming in here, as we were just saying earlier, to hear the kids laughing, playing in the water, running up and down the paths, climbing up and down trees and so on. It's just great. This is what kids need. They need to be away from the computers and the inside all day long, get out here, have fun and play. And we were planting some trees here in the estate last Monday, some apple trees, and the kids came along and planted those. And as soon as we told them we were doing this weekend, oh, we're coming, we want to come down and do this. So it's really important to get the kids in, but also everybody. And we were talking about our volunteers. They come from all walks of life. We've professionals, we've retired people, we've school teachers, we've anybody who's just interested in their community, and particularly after the pandemic. A lot of people, because they could only walk 2 kilometres, suddenly got to know what was on their doorstep.
I just think it creates an awareness of the value of what we have here in Douglas in terms of nature and the natural environment. And I think a lot of people mightn't be aware of what we have here in an urban area. So that's one of the key things, but also around the area of heritage and just community involvement in general, which is very important in any area.
From a personal perspective, it came very much because I lost both my parents at a relatively young age, and they were great. They grew up in the war, great stories to tell and so on. And I wish we'd written down more of that. And then we had the heritage photo exhibition in the shopping centre, and it was interesting just watching grandparents talking with the grandkids, pointing out things that they knew as a child. And Liam Bresnan, who's one of the guys we've interviewed, the butcher, brought me over, and he was telling me on one of the images, who used to live in that house and this house and that house. And we said, we've got to record this before it goes. So yeah, it just seemed really important to record just the story of the everyday people and what it was like growing up here, and from different perspectives. So that's really sort of where it came from, and just how important that was to know and remember.
Mr. Fickerman, please let me sleep 'neath the trees. My bones are as white as your own.
It was really, really fun growing up in Douglas. It was really fun, I have to say.
I just love Ravensdale still, because I know it's where we came from.
did this for my mum's sake, because her story is so important in starting her family in Douglas, and I'm so grateful for that.
In and out, around we go, the wheel of life runs sure but slow, school by soon to on and grow.
Oh, I love the place. I love where I live still, and I wouldn't live anywhere else.
In and out, around we go, the wheel of life runs sure but slow, school by soon to on and grow. Like the leaves that tumbling down.